Okay, in accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access Channel. Town of Lunenburg response to COVID-19 is currently following the guidance from the Lunenburg Board of Health, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread, and all town facilities are open by appointment only. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, all public meetings are being conducted remotely. Okay, before we get started, is there any public comment from the committee? Seeing none. Is there any public comment from the public? Also seeing none. I do not have any minutes to present to you right now. So we move right into review of the FY22 capital plan, including a new request from the schools to upgrade the primary school fire alarm system sooner rather than later. So Heather or John, if you want to walk us through that request and why it's needed now.
I'll just preface before handing off to John. So we received this request not this past Friday, the Friday before, which was forwarded to the Capital Planning Committee from the superintendent. It was discussed at their meeting prior to that, a school committee meeting. And there is a $25,000 earmark in the state budget for this project. There is $127,000 in a bond. Sorry, $100,000 in a bond bill, but very unlikely to see that. So John can give all the details as far as what this work would include, because this was a fiscal 23 project for $165,000, but it's not for that full scope of that project.
Thank you. So some of the reasoning behind why this is coming forward, when the school department puts together its capital plan, we look at over a 10-year period, we try to fit projects together. One of the things that the school committee over the last number of years has wanted me to do is try to make sure that I'm not coming in at any one time with large expenditures, and then have a year where there was very little. So they're looking for me to keep some kind of balance between how much the school department's requesting, and so we try to fit those projects in and try to figure out, well, where do they best fit. So the fire alarm project, is one where we've been seeing, increased degradation in the performance of the fire alarm system at the primary school, and I'll talk about how that looks like. And so, we've recognized that, we have this system and we kind of need to do something with it. 2 years ago, we initially went in and said, we need $165,000 for this project, and that didn't go anywhere. And that was trying to go through, the legislative process and see if, when they asked if you have projects that need funding, we said, yes, this is one that does need funding. Last year, we went back in when the request came in again, and we pared the project down to $127,000, and that's why the $25,000 is available. We also had this project for the air conditioning for the primary school, which we've been looking for a number of years. And when we had funding approved for design work in the last fiscal year, or in FY21, we continued to move forward with that project in FY22. And then when we saw that, that it looked like, okay, this project is going nowhere, it was ranked 19 out of 19 within the projects that were ranked. And we knew that the $25,000 was available. We thought it was, we said, we know this is an important thing to do. And so, if we're going to see any funding for air conditioning, then this is something that we would push into the next fiscal year if it didn't get funded, which would then put it in competition with this very project. So the recommendation, so I briefed the school committee and asked them to consider this, and they are bringing this forward as a recommendation to try to put this project into FY22, get it funded and out of the way, so that next year, as the air conditioning project, which still remains a very expensive project, gets into the next fiscal year, is not competing with this one as well. So let me talk about the condition of the system and what's going on with it, and just to kind of give you some of the background of why this is an important project. So this is of course, the original system installed in 2004 as the building was constructed, and it's been in operation, for its 15 plus years. The system has never been great in that it always had some quirks about how it operated. For the most part, we've had building safety, life safety has been, been managed, but what the issues have all revolved around operations in cold weather. And of course, in Massachusetts, we get lots of cold weather. When the building is allowed to get down to around 60 degrees, it starts causing issues with smoke detectors, and in somewhat of a random fashion, going in and out of trouble. And that's kind of dated back for a very long time. But it has become worse as we moved over the last 5 years. And has got to the point where I said this year it was to the point where I had to decide that what we needed to do was to essentially heat the school 7 days a week to be able to keep the system from just, going haywire. When a smoke detector goes into trouble, these are not staying in trouble. They're immediately coming right back out of trouble, which means that the company that monitors the fire alarm system gets a phone call when it goes into trouble. They get another phone call when it comes out of trouble. And if we don't go do something about that, that detector will continue to go in and out of trouble to the tune of like 40 to 80 times in an hour, which means our monitoring company is just getting deluged with phone calls. And as I mentioned, this is heavily tied to cold weather. So the cold weather, the coldest parts of the day are around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. So I've been getting phone calls, on a regular basis to, hey, we've got a detector going in and out of trouble. And, as I said, it starts probably very late November. And the last month and a half has been fine since we started heating the building every day of the week and not allowing a night setback. So every day of the week, we're bringing the building to 70 degrees. We're not running the air system, so we're not bringing outside air in, but this is what the kind of thing we had to do to be able to try to keep this system online. And we've had multiple vendors come and look at this, and they've done different things, but none of them really have been able to resolve it. We're hampered by the fact that this is a system that was manufactured by the Faraday company. They did fire alarms for a huge amount of time, for 80, 90 years. But in 2007, or shortly after it was installed, they were bought out by Siemens Corporation. And then since about 2007, they've no longer been making parts, and Siemens no longer supports the system. So there really are no Faraday service techs. We had one from 2005, unfortunately he passed away. So we really we've been the people taking care of it because there's nobody else. Protective Service helps us. They do our annual testing, and they can help us when we need help. But the system, because it's, as I said, an obsolete system and no longer supported by Siemens with either replacement smoke detectors or replacement boards for the main panel, we essentially have a system that, should it fail, gets an electrical spike that causes a board to fail, then we'll essentially won't have a working fire alarm system there. Like I said, we continue to maintain it, but we have gone through all of our spare detectors, and we have trained, replaced out detectors, and just trying to maintain this thing as best as possible. So currently I have all the detectors in place, but I have no spare detectors. And I do have one detector that continues to indicate that it might have problems. We have a test device. We test the smoke detectors, and they always test fine. But in the system, they're addressable detectors, meaning that the fire alarm knows what detector is having a problem, so it's reporting specific detector having an issue. And there are many detectors in the primary school. There's 212 smoke detectors, and then a good number of or a fair number of pull stations, 23 pull stations, five thermal detectors, and a couple of smoke detectors. And why that's important is, I think, you just indicate the magnitude of why it's so much money. Is we have lots and lots of detectors, and even at like $200 a piece, you're talking $40,000 worth of detectors to be replaced. And as you know, typically smoke detectors, you get about 10 years on them. We're at 15. Commercial detectors, when we take them down and test them, they test fine. But this is something that will probably, that clearly needs to be addressed at Lunenburg Primary School. Something probably will also need to be addressed at the other two town buildings that were built in 2005. That probably have comparable type systems. Anyway, so that's the urgency behind it. Like I said, we don't want to be in a position where this is an emergency repair. If we have a smoke detector that goes bad, we're just going to take it out of service. But if we have the main panel go bad, that means the whole system crashes, because the detectors are tied to the panel. So Siemens does not make any smoke detectors that they can put on that old Faraday panel. So the 25,000 that's available doesn't do us any good, because there's nothing we can do with it. We can't replace the main panel with the old detectors. We can't buy $25,000 worth of detectors because we can't use them with the old panel. So really our only way forward is to get this project to move forward. So the consideration we'd like is to see if this can get funded in FY22, knowing that we're probably going to be moving the air conditioning project to FY23.
John, is the earmark only good this year? Does it disappear?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I reached out to our state representative to find that out and tell them we still haven't got the state contract. We usually get that after they finalize earmarks. The appropriate agency sends us the contract documents, which tell you when it has to be used by. And I followed up with Sina's office again today, and they were going to talk to the appropriate agency soon.
Could I add one thing about, I don't think I made this clear, but so previously we had this at 165,000. And why we've dropped it to 127 is the intent will be to leave all of the horns and strobes, all the door holders, the notification panel, and the voice vac system in place, and continue to use those. Those don't have the same kind of tie to the main panel that the smoke detectors and the heat detectors do.
So this will be to replace the panel, the smokes, and the heat detectors?
It would be the main control panel, the 212 smoke detectors, the 5 thermal detectors, 2 duct spokes, 23 manual pull stations, and then there are about 24 control modules that also would be replaced. But so we would not touch the voice of act system. We would not touch any of the notification panels, or any of the horns and strobes, or any of the door holders.
Okay. Heather, do we have any idea do we have additional funding for this? Or are we kicking something off the list to fund this or down the list?
What I would recommend, because the additional funding isn't finalized yet, we're still working on what our unexpended capital is.
Mhm.
And so I would recommend that the committee prioritize it in the list of already approved projects. And then we can work from there, work our way down.
Okay. Do you have a graphic of our current list that you could share? I probably have them, but I'm not
yeah.
sure.
I should.
Before we get to that, Mr. Chair, may I ask Mr. Landa some questions?
Sure, go for it.
So first and foremost, for anybody who may be listening to this, and certainly for the committee members, is there now or has there been a safety issue where the people, the occupants, the students, teachers, staff, were in a safety issue with the current system the way it is right now?
The answer is no. We continue to operate the system. I think the biggest concern I've had was that we would get to the point where we would lose our monitoring company, and then that would put us into a really bad place. Like I said, we have to be very attentive to this, because if we don't get on top of it right away, and they get 300 or 400 phone calls from us, they'll be tempted to drop us as a client.
Sure. So,
And then you're really at, I don't know how you get another monitoring company, because unless you don't disclose that you're going to put this thing on with this issue.
sure. Did you indicate, that I hear correctly, that the current Faraday system that's in place is at the end of service life? Is that correct?
Yeah, so this, there 15 years is about when you should be thinking about this, because I said typically for smoke detectors, it's about 10 years what they kind of recommend. That we always tend to push that, I think.
No, that's for the detectors. I mean, but the problem is, you're not asking for us to replace the detectors. You said that we can't replace the detectors because the main board doesn't support them, the new ones. So that means I'm asking, is the main panel at the end of service life? If you call Siemens and ask for a replacement part, do they have them?
They do not.
Okay, and how
And-
long has it been since they haven't had them?
2007, they stopped manufacturing parts. So it would have been sometime after that, probably. And like I said, we can't get smoke detectors from Siemens, even though Siemens this is now a Siemens product. I can get the literature, but I can't get any parts or any.
Right, no, because it's end of service life. I understand. So this is, I would be remiss if I would not be doing my job as a committee member if I didn't know some of the following. So the first thing is, in your intro to this, and you have said that when you put these requests together, you're asked by the school committee to not, load numbers, projects on 1 years and try to spread them out. And while I certainly understand that, I'm concerned that a system that has been basically end of service, like with no additional parts being manufactured, which means that no additional parts were probably available. I'll give it 3 years after they stopped manufacturing that you probably couldn't get parts. So this is from 2010, that somehow in the prioritization process, the air conditioning got placed by the school committee's request to the capital planning committee, got placed ahead of this issue. And now this is being brought to us, I thought, at least when we got the email, that this is being brought to us as an emergency situation, but it's a situation that was known by everybody in the school department and has been on the list and got prioritized. Things got prioritized above it, but only when those things didn't get funded. It sounds like, oh, from my standpoint, and I'm just not going to pull any punches, it sounds like, oh, we didn't get the money we thought we would get, so now we should try to get this because this sounds like it has more sense of urgency. When really, that's not the way this whole process is supposed to work. How could this not have been near the top or at the top of the list of the school committee, the school department needs? How could the air conditioning be above this?
So we only put in 2 projects into FY22. One of them, the ones that we did put in was actually at FY21. So the question is where does it fit? So in FY21, we got funding to go ahead and do design work. So it seems logical that we would be bringing that project forward from the design point. And then this project, we realized that we had a need here. It's not like we haven't identified the need. The question is, where does it fit in sequence? And the sequence that made sense was request the funding for design. If that gets approved, then request the funding to actually execute the project. And we had this thing in there. It's just, like I said, the directions I've always been given is, hey, look, don't load all the projects up in 1 year. The town can't really handle it. So
Right.
and that was I think a valid reason, but like I said, we're not bringing this in as an emergency request. Now, it could become an emergency request, but it isn't today. And that's kind of been the situation since, parts no longer were made available. It could become, but it is not currently. But we do need to deal with it. And the question really is I think is level of support that we can get to keep our the capital expenditures we need to make moving forward.
Can I just say?
Yeah, sure.
And this is just my own observation and not knowing a lot about fire alarm systems, but to me, it sounds like it is a failing system. I mean, if you have smoke detectors, going in and out of, that they're not working and they're, sending 40 calls an hour to your monitoring service, and that you're contemplating removing those detectors because of that, that's to me a very important reason to try to fix the situation. But that's my own observation.
Yeah, I would say that, because the problem is not a year-round problem. But a substantial part of the year, we're trying to keep the building at 60 degrees on a week then there's no students in the building. So we're seeing it, February break, maybe December break. And obviously, once you get to April, the problem goes away until November. But yeah, it's an indicator, but with something we've been living with for was a long time, but it is getting worse. And that's what we're noting is that, hey, look, this is getting to be where we're also at the end of the life of the system. So we have, like I said, we have 2 other town buildings that are pretty much in the same boat. And I'm sure that at some point those systems will be coming forward for modernization as well. So, but it's, in this case, we look at where we are, we kind of think that, there's some funding available. We would like to we realize that we're not going to get funding for an air conditioning system. And we'd like to kind of move this thing so that it's not competing with that same project next year.
So
Dave, you have a question? He's been waiting. Dave has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, Tom, I think I'm going to hit on a couple of things, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I thoroughly agree with your approach to your comments already on this subject in regards to how long it's been going on. 2 nights ago, I went back to the Tuesday, November 10th meeting that we had when the school presented its capital plan. And if you go back and listen to that, we got the exact same words about the fire alarm system, but with the exception of, well, we're living with that and we can live with that for a while longer. The urgency wasn't there, as you mentioned, Tom, until the prioritization dropped the air conditioning to the bottom of the list. I'd also like to add that the school committee has prioritized 2 air conditioning projects ahead of life safety systems in the primary building. I see that as unconscionable. Life safety from the town's liability point of view heavily supersedes HVAC system in any building, as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, I can't hold back on supporting getting it done as soon as possible now, because one of the important things about multiple alarms is that complacency starts to set in. And if an alarm is ignored at the wrong time, we could have that building on the ground. So we kind of have no choice but to get this done. I think it could wait another year. The other comment I'd like to make is I'm a purchasing agent. I'm purchasing for plants that are 35 years old. You want to talk about obsolete equipment, and half of it was made in Europe. And yeah, I spent some time at it, but I'm able to source obsolete parts. I took a look at the Faraday stuff. I don't have model numbers and serial numbers available to me, but there are components out there available. They're not $200, they're $400. So to say that the system will go down, or actually it was stated as could go down, I don't disagree with that. But I do believe that with some scrambling or some preemptive investigation, smoke detectors, pull stations, I don't know the terminology, but there are also a number of different types of electronic boards that are available to get the system back up and running. And then it would be an emergency situation after that, you know, we can't afford to have the system go down again because they'd have to close the school. So those are my concerns. The prioritization especially seriously bothers me. This project should have been, excuse me, this project should have been ahead of both AC projects. I think it should have been ahead of the last, or alongside the last step of remediation of asbestos. I think it's a much higher priority than any of those. That's my piece at this point.
Tom, did you have something else?
Yeah, so I'm getting the impression, well, I'm sorry that you're the person who's been put before us on behalf of the school committee, because I don't think this prioritization necessarily was your whole, you know, your decision, but maybe it is. But anyway, I'm getting the impression of twofold. First of all, I'm getting the impression that if we had approved the HVAC system, that the school committee and the school department would have been fine with this, and this request would not have come in, which has me worried to begin with, because then why are we now, whether or not this was presented by the school department as being an emergency, it is now treated as such, because by all normal activities, the capital planning committee has completed its work. Like, we were presented with all this, and we took into consideration all the presentations by the departments. And only now, after we finalized this several weeks ago and put this in front of the town manager, is it we being asked to reconsider. The only reason I can think that we could be asked to reconsider is because there's new information, or it's become more dire or something like that. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm really caught at a place where I don't know how this was prioritized the way it was. And now I'm left with, okay, do I want to really change what the school department thought could wait till next year? Do I want to reprioritize it now this year? And that's not a good position for us to be in, because I really honestly don't believe we're getting the information at the right time with the right urgency of the projects that we needed to have.
I share your sentiment. When I heard that we were going to be reconsidering this, I thought something new had come to light. It was more urgent than it was before. And that's kind of what I was expecting out of this meeting. I'm not saying that's not important or urgent, but I'm not sensing any new developing thing that happened to make this rise above other projects that we've already prioritized. And this is something I'm missing.
Can I comment on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, we're not saying this is an emergency. But we are looking at the level of support that we had for where we think what we were going to be. We had identified this as a concern. We had put this out and we're able to be able to get some funding identified from the state to be able to assist with it. And like I said, we're looking at both these two projects, two relatively expensive projects, being in 1 year, being pushed into 1 year. And so, if your thought was that, we've finished our work and we won't want to consider another project or a replacement project or however you want to view that, then that'll be where you'll be. But we're bringing it forward because we know that we're going to be pushing multiple relatively expensive projects into the same year, and whether that's going to receive any support next year either, I don't know. But where we are today, we have some access to funding that will likely be available. It is something that's been on the capital plan. I think if I was bringing it to you that said that the state was funding 127,000, we'd like to move this into FY22, you'd be okay with that.
Well, yeah, but that's because we wouldn't be raising any money and it would be funded totally outside of the town. Sure, that would be an easy thing too, right?
Yeah. So I'm bringing it to you. So I'm not saying it's an emergency. We didn't paint it. I haven't tried to paint it as an emergency. I didn't want to downplay that there is some sense of urgency, but it's not an emergency.
Okay.
Damon, if I could.
Sure. All right, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with the conversation, the back and forth that we've had here for the last 15, 20 minutes or so. A couple other things too. The bond money, I have a problem with how we advocate for money that's already allocated for projects. To just communicate with our representatives and senator through the town manager is not strong advocacy as far as I'm concerned. Working with former Senator Dean Tran, I learned a lot from him about, public contacting the legislature and, a lot of squeaky wheels advocating for that money and saying that, oh, well, we don't expect that any bond money is going to be released. I don't go forward with that attitude. I go full force to advocate for it to be released. Don't say, well, gee, in this situation that we're in, it's doubtful any money's going to get released. I don't believe in that. And partially because of the way revenues are going with the state. If they're telling us the truth with the way revenues are flowing and the way they're developing the budgets and the rainy day fund that they have, yeah, they've dipped into it, but they still got an awful lot of money in there. I can't believe that with enough advocacy that we can't pry that $100 or whatever $1,000 out of that bond. Then you'd have the entire project covered. Lastly, and I know Heather, you've probably got some comments. Lastly, my understanding, and again, the last say will come, I'm sure, from Representative Senator's office on yes or no about this. But my understanding with an earmark of the type that this sounds like this is, once you get the notification that you're waiting for, that's money in the bank. And I was actually told that you could go as far as that's money in the bank that if it doesn't get spent on what it was originally earmarked for, it's still in your bank and you can use it for something else.
No.
Well, I will check that out with my sources because it depends on how it was, what source it's coming from and how it was written, but that's fine.
So earmarks, in the state budget are written into certain agencies, departments, and they're specific to the request as far as scope. So there have been instances where we advocated if that money can be the deadline for expenditure be pushed forward. But to change the actual purpose, I've never seen that happen.
I will ask for a written determination on that sometime in the future, but it doesn't have any bearing on what we're working on tonight anyway.
Well, and if I may, Mr. Chair, just to comment, although what our fellow committee member said also doesn't pertain to this, I do want to comment because it was a free comment, that when it comes to the bond bills and advocating, I don't want to speak for the town manager, but as chair of the select board, I will say that, there's a far cry difference between advocating for the bond bill and what is expected. I don't want people to say the expectation indicates a resignation. I think we are doing everything we can to interact with our state delegation to push for the bond bill in every way we can. If the public wants to get involved, I encourage them to get involved. So I would agree with Mr. Passios on that, but I would not take the town manager's comment that we're not expecting it as any kind of resignation. It's just historically, that is the way they work. And if it hasn't been released by now, it's very unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that it would be statistically. That's all. They're not going to pry one project either. The bond bill is a conglomeration of projects that either they approve the whole bond or they don't. Rarely do they, in fact, I don't know that I've ever seen, although I could be mistaken, do partially cover one of the bonds. Usually they cover the whole bond or they don't cover any of it. And they're big bills.
And just this week, I talked before the select board's meeting with Representative Kushmarek about the bond bills. All three of our legislators know all the specifics related to the projects and the three different bond bills that we have. They have the line item numbers in those bond bills so they can advocate on our behalf. And I heard yesterday, they now know the appropriate people that they need to reach out to, but it's going, as they understand it, this is coming from Rep. Sina's office. Bond bill money getting released is tough, but they'll still try for us.
Thank you for that information.
So are we interested in relooking at our prioritization for this project, or what's everybody feeling?
Personally, hearing Mr. Londa say that it is not an emergency, therefore, I believe we gave it the proper attention when we went through and prioritized all the projects that were submitted to us. And barring any new information, I am not inclined to change the prioritization of what is funded and what is not.
Mr. Chair, could I ask the town manager a quick question?
Sure.
Hypothetical. If, well, I guess it doesn't matter whether we're into the next fiscal year or not. Next month, the fire alarm system has a catastrophic failure so that it's inoperable. How does the town fund that? Because we would have to get it back up and running. And if it was catastrophic, I'm saying that the systems intended to be replaced are all non-functional. So the whole system needs to be done, and quickly.
So if it were to happen before town meeting, you're saying?
Yes.
I think there would still be the ability to amend the capital plan at that point.
feel the same way. As long, if it
But,
happens-
but that's
the real
funding
question
and
is what, real question is what happens the day after, on May 2nd, what happens? That's
Right.
probably a better question.
Yeah.
If it happened then, I would say, number one, it would have, you'd look to the available resources, which would be a reserve fund. So you go to the finance committee for that. And then any other supplementary available resources outside the reserve fund. We haven't touched the reserve fund yet, so there's 75,000 in the reserve fund.
Okay, so we haven't got a fund built up enough to absorb this as an emergency repair.
Our salary, our regular reserve fund is our emergency.
But this guy, I remember, I mean, just following that line of thought, I remember, and Mr. Londo, I think you were involved in this too, when we had the heating system for Passios and the high school, failed, and that was not allocated, and that was an emergency, I believe, and we had to come up with money, and that was in the millions.
I would comment that. So there's only one project I've done since 1998 that's been an emergency, and that was the old primary school boiler failure in December, where it had a hole the size of a nickel in the boiler. And that was emergency funded, and I had to go see the finance committee to get funding put in place to do that. But the Passios in the high school heating system, that was a capital. It was a
that was done
that explosion, I believe.
Okay. All right, I thought that was an emergency one too, because I
No.
mean, there's got to be, things like this do happen, unforeseen to anybody. You could have something really catastrophic happen. So there's got to be mechanisms to do that. And since it's a school and it's a safety issue, obviously, there's got to be ways that municipalities can deal with this, even if it goes outside of how much you have in the reserve fund. You can't have a school operate without a, fire alarm.
I would say the first source would be the reserve fund, and then the school has their facilities budget, which they could spend out of that and ask for additional funding at the special town meeting.
Right, to backfill, sure.
I just wanted to throw that out there so we'd have that context. I'm leaning towards voting to not add it to the list. And like I said earlier, minor complete failures that require replacement of certain components, I think with a little work, I don't know, but I think with a little bit of sourcing work, the necessary pieces could be procured. 200 plus smoke detectors, no, I don't think so, not that many. But I did see, 5 here, 20 here, 10 there when I looked the other night. I'm ready to make a motion that we do not change our prioritization list.
Could I just make another comment too, just to add to the discussion?
Sure.
This project is also on the list of budget priorities that we've given to the state too. So there's another possibility that it could receive another earmark in the state budget for fiscal 22.
And in that case, it will be covered and we won't have to have it in 23.
Right.
Okay. So was that, are you ready to make a motion, Dave, or was that your motion?
Yeah, that is my motion, that at this time, I do not feel the capital planning committee has the desire to change its prioritization list.
I would second that.
Okay. Before we vote, I would just express my agreement with that. I'm just looking at the items at the tail end of what would potentially be funded in our, in our scheme of rankings, and items like a police cruiser and carpet that's a tripping hazard in the public safety building, and Marshall Park feasibility study. I mean, time-sensitive things, tripping hazards that would get kicked off in place of this. It just, mean, we could add it to, I guess we could add it to further down the list than that, but I don't see it as rising above those items that are likely to get funded this year.
One other quick comment, if I may. The other thing is that, from my perspective anyway, I don't know about the rest of the members of this committee, but we kind of concentrated on a lot on the facilities projects that were brought forward for this year, because we have pushed aside projects on these buildings for a lot of years. And if we don't start doing some of these small projects, we're going to be potentially in the same position as we are now with the old primary building. And these buildings that we're putting money into now are occupied. So we need to put the we need to fix the outer structures to keep these buildings habitable for the distant future, it looks like at this point. Thank you.
With that, I guess we'll take a vote on the motion. All in favor, Dave?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
And aye for myself. All right, well, so we certainly look forward to, well, hopefully we can get some funding before next year, but seriously considering this project next year when it comes before us, which I'm sure it will. And hopefully we can take care of the problem. All right. So with that, I guess we'll move on to, well, the next item that was listed on our agenda was discussion of fiscal policies related to capital planning and projects. I'm not, with only 3 of the 5 members, I'm not sure how deep we want to get into policy tonight, but at least I personally read through the policies, Dave, that you said the finance committee was looking for us to weigh in on. And I didn't see anything else that I thought we should jump on or try to modify than just potentially the dollar amount of what falls into a capital project. I don't know if anyone else took the time to do that.
I honestly haven't had a chance to go into that, to the reread on that as deeply as I'd like to. I kind of remember in the back of my mind that there might be a couple of, I'll just call them definitions right now, but what other things constitute a capital project other than the dollar amount? And I haven't, excuse me, haven't fully digested that part of it yet. I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Alonso because, you never know who of us 3 are going to be at the next meeting we scheduled to talk about this. So, at least have some basic discussion about it. And I agree, the most important part of it is the dollar amount and, vetting the ramifications of changing that number is going to be important before we do make any changes to that.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
So a couple things. First of all, because of all the stuff getting ready with the town, town meeting warrant article and all the stuff going on with, licensing and all the things going on beforehand, I really haven't, as Mr. Passio said, I would echo, I didn't have a chance to really do a deep dive on this. But, from having read it before previously, really it's the dollar amount to me that just triggers the discussion to potentially change. I guess I'll just reiterate my position when we talked about this last with the committee. It's just a matter of how those things get funded. When I say it should go outside of this committee, it just means that I think that the town manager and her financial team certainly have the ability to allocate things lower than the threshold and the committee is going to discuss. And she has the ability to allocate that money to individual departments as part of her normal budget request. even if it's allocated as a special line item for, but capital items. So it's not intended to be part of their annual year after year budget. So it's not necessarily operating budget. It is still capital. It's just not capital that goes through the capital plan. I mean, if there's something that's $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, I could easily see that the town manager and her finance team could say, there's no reason for the committee to take that up. They can make determinations of their own about where those projects could be allocated in any one year without coming to the committee. The committee should, I think, just be addressing the larger projects. That's all. If we're going to spend a big chunk of money, $30,000, $40,000 and above, that seems to make sense that a committee would determine it. Otherwise, I think it's fully within the purview of the town manager and the finance director and their team to put the rest of the projects into the budget as capital items without our specific approval. That's the mechanism that I foresee working. Not that it goes into their operating budget and the next year they get the same money, even though they don't have that project. That's not the way I perceive it working.
I would tend to agree with those statements, Tom.
So I think it's just a matter of what do we want that threshold to be? I think we all agreed that at least I thought, and again, we don't have two of the other members here, but I think that we all agreed that we should be higher. It's just a matter of how higher, right? So at some point it's an arbitrary number. It's just a matter of what we want to make that number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We kicked a number around at that meeting, but I agree. I think we should not dive into that much further at this point. The $30,000 to $50,000 range, I think, is the ballpark we were talking. 50,000, and again, as I said earlier, I think we need to do a few scenarios when we're talking about that, whatever number we come up with, and because there are an awful lot of things that, if you look historically back on the capital plan, that are well under 50,000. And quite a few under 30,000, and how, again, I agree. I think any project under 30,000, to tell you the truth, should be pushed into the annual operating budget, even if it's a special projects line for a given department for a given year.
Right.
Then it targets that project for that department and funds it whichever way the town manager sees best to fund it. And it gets the work done.
All right. Well,
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I'd love to know from the town manager, does that scenario as proposed, does that work? Would that hinder your budget development? Would it accelerate it? What was your reaction?
I have mixed feelings on this, because I agree with the concepts, but I also see that a lot of the time the conversation revolves around which departments get, what increases. And there would be fluctuations, obviously, year to year, given the scenario, putting different capital projects in respective departments' budgets. And from a budgeting standpoint, when you're forecasting out, that would be more challenging. And yeah, I still need to give it more thought, but those were my initial thoughts.
okay.
Thank you.
Well, at least from my eyes, we're trying to make this easier for you, not harder. So if it goes against that, then let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That really echoes my sentiment too. I mean, the whole point is to streamline it for everybody and not to offload all of our workload as a committee and put it on you and not vice versa. I think we're trying to find out which way works best and makes the most sense. But if the committee is spending time talking about a $15,000, $12,000 carpeting project, it seems to be that it's just not a good use of anybody's time, that it could be easily in your purview to just say, that should be there. And of course, I think, we need to look at the long view, and nobody can take a year or 2 years in a row and say, well, this department got favored over this. You really got to look at 5-year stretches or 6-year stretches. And eventually those kind of projects tend to even out. over time, one would assume. And if you see a trend that, oh, all these projects are always going to the same place, then it raises people's eyebrows, and they still have the chance to object to it at town meeting. So
All right, well, I guess we'll save the rest of that discussion for when we have more of the board present. So just three of us running the show. But is there any, before we close, any other comments from the public? I guess that's you, John. Any other comments from the board? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Damon, are
Move
we
to
going to
adjourn.
set a date?
Oh, guess we could. Should probably get back to our Tuesdays, I would assume.
Yeah. Like early April, maybe. Early to mid-April. I forget the date that FinCom is planning to start taking a look at fiscal policies and stuff like that. Do you remember, Heather? I think it was sometime in April, wasn't it?
I thought it was going to be after town meeting. No?
I'm not sure. I'll ask Terry if we'll be in the meeting at 7, because I thought she said April, and I was a little confused at first, but also there's that break for the finance committee between when our public hearing happens and town meeting, where we're not as pressured for, weekly meetings. And I think it got plugged in there somewhere, but I do not remember for sure.
You want to do April 6th? And just the one thing like for our agenda really is this policy discussion.
Yeah, that works for me. And then again, as always, if something comes up that needs to be added, that's up to
what
the
date
chair.
did you say?
April 6th, just the
6,
first.
okay, yep.
Okay. All right. Now, would someone like to make a motion to
I
adjourn?
will now resurrect my motion to adjourn.
Second,
All in favor, Dave,
aye.
Tom,
Aye,
and I for myself. Thank you, everybody.
thanks, everyone.
Thank
Night,
you.
everybody.
Night.
Good night.